Throughout WoW's history, many events and characters have come and gone. Some were incredibly iconic, and some not so much. In this list, we're going to be counting down some of the most brutal deaths in WoW's history. And when we talk about brutal, it's going to be moments that downright just look painful to experience, or would just leave the player completely shocked at how messed up an event was. Some will be big name characters, and others will not. And at number 10, we have Samuel Williams, an NPC from Battle for Azeroth. This may come as a surprise, as not many people remember who this character was, especially if you were a Horde player during BFA. Even as an Alliance player, the overall known story in Stormsong Valley dealt with the betrayal of Lord Stormsong, and all eyes would have been on him, so it can be pretty easy to miss what happens with Samuel. Fortunately, the events that transpire are part of the main questline in the valley, so maybe more people do remember it than don't. Basically, Sam was among the workers who were trapped in Mariner's Stand, a location in Stormsong wholly dedicated to building ships for the Quel'dorei fleet. He was trapped by corrupted Tide Sages and overall Stormsong loyalists. He would be freed by the player character and vowed to fight for the Storm's Wake, a faction adjacent to House Stormsong that mainly resides in Brennadam. Sam eventually charges into Port Fogtide to slay a Kathir that had taken over the port, but is captured in the process. During his imprisonment, Sam was subjected to many methods of torture as they attempted to forcefully turn him into a Kathir. As the player character, we would put a stop to this for Sam, but the whispers remained, despite the ritual being interrupted. Sam's condition would steadily worsen, and in the events, the player would oppose Lord Stormsong himself. Samuel would be completely transformed into an Iraqi faceless one by the name of Azjuthol the Drowned. Talia would try to reach Sam to break him from his new form, but the most learned Tide Sages we met thus far, Brother Pike, informs us that all that remains is complete darkness. It may seem pretty whatever on the surface to some, but imagining someone's body being twisted and transformed into this unrecognizable eldritch horror sounds terrifying. You can only imagine what Sam was hearing before the ritual was complete, what untold whispers were driving him mad to a state of despair. Stormsong saw this weakness and exploited him fully, and when Samuel was no more, we're only left to wonder what happened to Sam when the Faceless emerged. Was he still sentient of his actions, or did he become a mindless drone of the name of another? There's many implications of Sam's death here, and it's even possible Stormsong drowned him on land himself based on the Faceless's name. Either way, Sam went out in a terrifying manner. But because he's not a very well-known character and is put out of his potential suffering rather quickly, he only earns number 10. And at number 9, we have Ysera. Ysera is known by many as the former aspect of the Dreams, who's recently retired her mantle to her daughter Maritha since her death. She would be present in the events of Cataclysm to fight against Deathwing, and overall serves to aid the Druids in their endeavors. She would provide her wisdom and powerful nature abilities, regardless of her powers being diminished since Deathwing's demise. During Legion, the land of Al-Shara had become under corruption of the Emerald Nightmare, the polar opposite of the Emerald Dream that had been corrupted by the Old Gods. This corruption obviously must be halted, so Ysera sends the player to a nearby temple of Elune to retrieve the Tears of Elune, a very pinnacle of creation itself that would embody the dream of what Azeroth could have been. During this time, Xavius, the one responsible for Val'Shara's corruption, would attack the temple and steal the Tear of Elune. Xavius would then corrupt the Tear of Elune and use it to corrupt Ysera in turn. Not only is this a large display of Xavius' power, but you can see Ysera in great pain as the tear is lodged into her chest. It slowly transforms her body as she crashes down to the earth and is no doubt still experiencing the pain. Once the transformation is complete, the aspect rises a former shell of themselves and is enveloped in the nightmare. The thing is, Ysera is completely aware of her actions here, and is completely incapable of stopping herself from what is happening. Players are tasked with having to put Ysera down in order to save the Temple of Elune and the Tears. Finding her will reveal she has already been engaged in battle with her previous friends, as unwilling as she truly is. Her body continues to break, and it isn't until we slay her ourselves that she's free of the corruption that torments her. Her last moments were of pain and powerlessness to stop the very thing she fought against. Thankfully, Elune herself reaches down to restore Ysera's corruption, but not her wounds, as the aspect does still pass and travels to Ardenwald. Ysera had a somewhat happier ending than other entries on this list, so she only gets number 9. But her death is still one of the more painful sequences to watch, and you're forced to put down one of the most popular dragons in Warcraft to ease her suffering. And at number 8, we have Garrosh Hellscream's death from Warlords of Draenor. Garrosh is known to many as the war chief who did nothing wrong, and memes aside, he's still one of the most iconic faces in the Warcraft franchise. His thirst for battle and need for conquest, but sense of honor for his kin, has always struck players deep in an appreciation for his personality. Garrosh would eventually become so fanatical in his conquests that he'd take the aid of the dead old god Y'Shaarj. He would go on to establish the True Horde, where only orcs will rule Azeroth with pride. Garrosh was ultimately defeated in the process and was then put on trial by the many lead characters of the Azeroth factions. The August Celestials, great wild gods of Pandaria, would be his judge. During the trial, Garrosh would escape with the bronze dragon named Kyra's Dormu. Garrosh, in a very Hellscream fashion, killed the dragon almost instantly once they had traveled to the alternate timeline of Draenor to rally the Iron Horde. Garrosh and his father Grommash would establish the Iron Horde and kick off the events of Warlords of Draenor, and we would meet Garrosh again in Nagrand. Players would battle against him with his Warsong clan until Thrall arrives to issue a Mak'gora, a duel to the death against Garrosh. Thrall and Garrosh would duel one another, and as many have come to know, Garrosh loses this battle. Thrall would begin to use his elemental powers and an advantage against Garrosh and overwhelm him. He would strike him with lava and encase him in a hand of earth itself. His bones were being crushed slowly, and the orc was completely unable to move with the hand as he screamed at Thrall for making him what he is. Thrall retorts against Garrosh, claiming it was his own fault, and strikes him down with a single bolt of lightning. While Garrosh may have died rather quickly, he certainly went down painfully. His body being crushed and then zapped by lightning definitely is a bad way to go, and the pain it would have inflicted sounds unimaginable. You can even still see his limp body with the stone that encased him, showing no signs of life. Garrosh would return in the Shadowlands expansion for a brief duration, however. During this Sanctum of Domination raid, after he defeats Soulrender Dormazane, Garrosh breaks free of the bonds that held his spirit. His spirit was used to fuel the engines of the Jailer's minions and war machines, as his pride alone was so great it rivaled entire armies. Once Soulrender goes down, Garrosh takes his captor's own blade and kills him with it, but also destroys his spirit in the process, saying he regrets absolutely nothing and would do it all again in the name of the Horde. But this entry is more so talking about his first death rather than his final. We find ourselves at number 8 for Garrosh simply because he goes out rather quickly, so there is little room for suffering on his part. Yet he is still a very remembered icon, and his death cinematic still garners attention to this day. And at number 7, we have the alternative universe version of Gul'dan. Gul'dan would serve as the main antagonist of Warlords of Draenor and be the catalyst that created the Fel Horde at the end of the expansion. He is one of the most powerful warlocks in WoW's existence and heeds the call of his master Sargeras. He and his Shadow Council are directly responsible for a large majority of the demonic influence that takes place in Legion and Draenor. At the very end of Warlords of Draenor, Gul'dan would be thrown through a portal by Archimonde, bringing him to our current timeline of Azeroth. Once he reached this land, Gul'dan sought out the tomb of Sargeras and helped begin the third invasion of the Legion. He was the direct cause of many deaths in WoW's well-known characters during this expansion, and was the one who created the alliance with the Nightborn and Theramore under the supervision of Grand Magistrix Alisson. Gul'dan would then steal the imprisoned soul of the long-dead Illidan Stormrage and bring it atop the pinnacle of the Nightborn society, the Nighthold. It is here he intends to return his master Sargeras to the realm of Azeroth by using Illidan's corpse as his vessel. Gul'dan very nearly succeeded in his mission before Khadgar would return the soul of Illidan to his body, and the player characters put Gul'dan down and thwart his efforts. The portal he once opened to bring Sargeras to our world begins to close, and Gul'dan begins to lose the power that he called upon, returning to his frail, older state. As a mirrored event to the time the elements abandoned his call, Gul'dan is left kneeling and alone. Illidan returns to his body and reveals himself to Gul'dan, who is left horrified at what has transpired. Illidan grabs the orc by the throat and lifts him to throw so much power into the orc's body that it begins to make his body crack and disintegrate from Illidan's power within. All Gul'dan can really do is struggle for air and scream, and Illidan uses his wings to blow away the literal dust that is created from Gul'dan's body. It's a sort of poetic justice, considering Gul'dan's methods to slay another known character in lore. He does go out rather quickly in this very moment, but the events from this fight showed he was very quickly putting his body through too much, and the warlock was soon overwhelmed by the power the players possessed, especially with their newfound artifact weapons. And at number 6, we have Varian Wrynn. Varian was the king of Stormwind, and by proxy, the Alliance as a whole. He would lead the Alliance through many expansions and proved himself a great military tactician and warrior to the people around him. His personalities were split during the time Onyxia, or Lady Prestor, took control of Stormwind in the absence of Varian. One with his diplomacy and kindness, and the other with his brutish fighting ability. When conjoined, they created the Varian Wrynn we know today, helping stand against the Lich King, Deathwing, the tyrannical Garrosh, the Iron Horde, and the very burning Legion. Varian would personally lead the assault on the Broken Shore to combat the Legion with the knowledge he may never return. Throughout the Broken Shore scenario, we see Varian charging headfirst to preserve the Alliance. Unfortunately, Gul'dan begins to overwhelm the fighting forces with literal infinite amounts of demons that swell and overpopulate their attacks. Varian learns this is a lost battle and calls for a retreat, and helps get his people to safety. Gul'dan intervenes by summoning a Fel Reaver to fight and nearly brings down the Alliance leaders with it in one fell swoop. Varian tells Gen to inform his son of what's to come and throws himself at the Fel Reaver and kills it alone to allow Gen and the others to escape. With the Alliance successfully retreating, Varian is forced to defend himself against the many remaining demons upon the shore and fights tooth and nail for his life. He is brought down by 2 spears through his back and is brought before Gul'dan. Gul'dan taunts the king before conjuring a spell to burn the king to ashes and torture him in his final moments. Varian screams in horror from the pain as his body literally chips away and burns from the inside out before being blown to pieces. The cinematic pans away to Gan Greymane, who knows what has transpired and can only mourn the loss of his king. It's become an incredibly iconic last few moments for a character, especially Varian, and definitely instills dread in the players watching the events. The chilling agony Varian is inflicted as he stands and defies the Legion is truly a spectacle, and we're left to pick up the pieces he left behind. And at number 5, we have Tirion Fordring's death from Legion. Tirion Fordring is known to players as the Supreme Commander of the Argent Crusade, and more iconically as the one who struck down the Lich King himself and shattered Frostmourne into pieces. He nearly became the Lich King in order to keep the Scourge at bay, but passed the duty down to Bolvar Fordragon instead. When the Legion invaded Azeroth for the 3rd time, Tirion answered the call to defend Azeroth, alongside his Argent Crusade. On the Broken Shore, the Argent Crusade, Alliance, and Horde had banded together to fight the demons invading. The battle, however, was a complete disaster, and many of the soldiers and named characters of each faction were obliterated. Tirion was captured by Gul'dan and used as bait for the Alliance and Horde to attempt to save him. During this process, Gul'dan summoned the giant demon Croesus, who then vomited a storm of fel at Tirion and burned his divine shield protecting him, and Tirion in the process. He was then dropped into the fel lava below. By a miracle, however, Tirion actually survived this encounter, despite his body being burned beyond recognition. He was found and captured, again, by the Legion, and even after the burns he had endured, they continued to torture and pry the Paladin for information. He was completely unable to fight, and when saved by the player character, no amount of healing could restore his wounds. Tirion names the player character the New Ashbringer and gives him his weapon of the same name, ordering him to stop the Legion before succumbing to his wounds. Tirion quite literally went through days of torture on end before he finally died. He was killed very slowly, and even as one of the most renowned paladins of Warcraft history, he could not withstand it. Next up at number 4, we have the Thal'darah Grove bombing. Thal'darah Grove was once a training ground for druids that was located in the Stone Talon Mountains. It harbored a large tree that was known to be a place of peace and taught many generations of druids, primarily being utilized by the Quel'dorei and Tauren. By all means, it was a completely neutral zone, and had many families that lived within it that only wished to learn the ways of druidism. The Horde primarily controlled the land of Stone Talon Mountains, and one orc by the name of Overlord Cromgar was in charge of overseeing it. Cromgar was fiercely loyal to the new crowned warchief, Garrosh Hellscream, and was incredibly paranoid of his position. He actually wasn't that bad of a guy, just overly paranoid. He even purchases ice cream for a blood elf child, Clarissa, who was present at the Fortress Cromgar that resides within. Cromgar tells the player character that he believes Thal'darah Grove is holding a weapon of mass destruction that would be used against the Horde, who is still recovering from the effects of the Cataclysm. This was completely false, however, and Cromgar was working purely off of superstition. During these events, Cromgar built a bomb, one so large that it is considered one of the largest to ever be created. Cromgar would bring the bomb over the grove via hot air balloon and drop it on the completely neutral druids and utterly annihilate all who were there. Almost immediately, Garrosh entered the equation. He learns of Cromgar's actions as they were not taken with Garrosh's permission, and while enraged, he dismisses Cromgar by dropping him off the nearest cliff to his death. Just before the events, however, the Alliance were able to save some of the children residing within the tree, but not everyone. There were still many who died for literally no reason. It's a terrifying realization when the player sees what they had aided in doing, and Garrosh even directs his ire towards you for a moment, almost making it seem like you were next. Thankfully, the High Chieftain advocates for you and spares Garrosh's wrath. But just to think that the peaceful land of these druids was suddenly completely wiped out leaves a pit in anyone's stomach. And at number 3, we have Sylvanas and the fall of the Quel'dorei. Sylvanas is known as the Banshee Queen and leader of the Forsaken People. But what happened leading to such a title? Before the events of Shadowlands, that is. Originally, Sylvanas was the Ranger General of the Quel'dorei people and commanded their forces with great strategy. She would defend her homeland from outsiders such as the Amani Trolls and Orcish Horde from the Second War. She was greatly known amongst her people and was favored with very high regard for her efforts. Several years after the Second War, the High Elves would be greeted with a new threat, the Scourge. They would hear tales of the plagued grain that was turning people into monstrous undead, and vowed to keep their land safe from any attackers. Eventually, Arthas, now taken by Frostmourne, and heeding the will of the Lich King Ner'zhul, arrived at the doorstep of Quel'Thalas. Sylvanas battled against the soon-to-be Lich King with all her might and forced Arthas to create many new strategies to best her in combat. She created many diversions and held him back for a considerable amount of time, only to learn she was doomed all the same, as every one of her rangers had been slaughtered. Arthas would eventually kill Sylvanas himself and stab her in the stomach with Frostmourne, stealing her very soul from her body and killing her. Though annoyed by Sylvanas' persistence, Arthas transformed the Ranger General into a Banshee and very forcefully made her watch the near extinction of her entire race. Arthas proceeded to slaughter anyone who stood in his way so that he may resurrect the necromancer Kel'Thuzad. He would kill roughly 90% of the High Elves that reside within Quel'Thalas. As spectators of this catastrophe, it wasn't the first time Arthas went on a purge of an entire city. Sylvanas specifically is tortured and made to watch every High Elf citizen die a painful death to the Scourge Arthas commanded. You can only imagine the terrible ways the Quel'dorei had to go out, as the Scourge had zero empathy for the living and will do whatever it takes in their immoral ways to win, as Arthas even commanded Sylvanas herself to go in and help with the killing. And at number 2 on this list, we have the attack on Theramore Isle. Theramore was a human city established in Kalimdor and served as the most martial location in the continent. It was primarily a Kul-Tiran-ruled landscape and was often used as a port for Kul-Tiran fleets to transport with the kingdoms of Stormwind and the Alliance as a whole. When its former leader, Daelin Proudmoore, was slain, his daughter Jaina Proudmoore would take up the rule of the city in his stead. It was used as a bastion to rally support to the Night Elves after the Cataclysm, as the Horde was seeking to expand its territories for resources under the eyes of Garrosh Hellscream. Since Theramore was such a beacon to utilize Alliance resources, Garrosh waged war upon the city in hopes to take it by force and claim the port for his own uses. Fearing the worst, the Alliance bolstered the defenses of Theramore by deploying many troops. Even the Kirin Tor would accompany Jaina in the work to defend the capital city. Garrosh would send his forces to attack both the north and west gates to weaken their defenses slowly over time, with Thal and Songweaver working to disrupt the Alliance from within, as he was a rogue Kirin Tor spy under Garrosh's command. Battle would ensue, and ultimately Garrosh's forces would be pushed back and Thalen rescued. Many Horde soldiers lost their lives, and Jaina proclaimed that Theramore's defense had been victorious. It is here Garrosh reveals his true plan and explains this battle was only meant to draw the Alliance's greatest commanders out of hiding. Garrosh then orders a mana bomb empowered by the Focusing Iris, an artifact of great arcane energy, to be dropped on Theramore. The bomb is dropped on Theramore and detonates, killing all within the city, including the former leader of the Kirin Tor, Ronan. Similar to the bomb in the Thal'darah Grove, everyone was killed almost instantly. Many members of the Alliance were slaughtered that day by Garrosh's order. Even before the distraction battle began, Jaina was able to evacuate all the civilians at Theramore and send them on a ship to Tanaris. It's possible these civilians were captured and killed anyways, even after surviving the detonation of the bomb, due to the Horde's new naval position with Theramore destroyed. Various Theramore citizens, including children, were stolen and sent to Orgrimmar, and many are seen dead and alive throughout the Siege of Orgrimmar that takes place later in Mist of Pandaria. Strategically, Garrosh played a very good move on his part and did secure the land for the Horde, but ultimately left many of its members horrified at his actions. Bane, Bloodhoof, and Vol'jin specifically were unaware of Garrosh's true plan, and to see they'd aided the lives of innocents and soldiers alike gone in an instant left them mortified. Players can't help but share a similar sentiment, as the effects of this tragedy is still felt by the Alliance in Kul-Tiras today, mainly Jaina. It's scary to see the effects it had, like turning Jaina from this bookworm and trustworthy leader to this vengeful mage filled with ire for all Horde denizens. It's a testament to how brutal Garrosh's methods were and why he was ultimately overthrown in the first place. It's especially rough considering Garrosh previously had such a distaste for killing innocents in a war previously, but became so conquest heavy towards the end of MoP that he started to kill innocents of any sort as well. And at number 1, we have Deathwing. Formerly the Black Dragon aspect, Neltharion, Deathwing was corrupted by the old gods and driven mad by their whispers of power. He would turn against his siblings and all of dragonkind to fulfill the wishes of his new masters and deemed himself the aspect of death. His lore is a long and lengthy process that continues to expand today through his children and creations dating all the way back to Vanilla WoW and further. Basically, Deathwing would retreat to Deepholm after a loss to his siblings and was believed to be dead during the time he was, as he slumbered for many generations. The corruption and uses of the demon soul that took hold of him empowered him to insane levels, to the point where his very body was cracking and being constantly destroyed. The Twilight Hammer cult had to build Neltharion very special armor that could keep his flesh together without breaking apart, to the point where his entire body was completely covered in armor. You can see his body seeping from the open areas of his armor, and he's presumably constantly in pain because of this. Even with the armor, it's barely able to hold him together, as the Elementium plates threaten to fail every second and require constant maintenance. When Deathwing would rise from the Maelstrom, his power tore a rift in the elemental plane in Azeroth itself and caused natural disasters all across Azeroth. Very little was untouched by the Shattering, and Azeroth continues to feel its effects to this day. In order to defeat Deathwing and stop the Hour of Twilight, an event prophesied by the old gods where they will be set free and end all life on Azeroth, the dragon aspects had to relinquish their powers to the ancient artifact called the Dragon Soul, a weapon capable of defeating or enslaving dragons. Thrall would use this weapon on Deathwing and weaken him, eventually leading to the Spine of Deathwing encounter. During this fight, players work together to tear off the platings holding Deathwing's body together very slowly. You can see the mutations that have grown upon his body since the corruption of the old gods, and the very flesh of his body peeling away as you progress the fight. It's a pretty hideous thing to watch, and once you remove all 3 plates from his back during the fight, Thrall channels the Dragon Soul once again to hit Deathwing. It strikes him clear in the open space we just made on his body, and presumably kills him as he falls into the Maelstrom here. Now Tirion comes back shortly after, showing he survived the blast and what was left to him was nothing but a mindless horror of hatred and molten lava. His body was fully enveloped in the magic of his old god masters, and he clearly cannot handle what has been given to him as his body sprouts into many different limbs that desperately cling to kill his enemies. Considering Deathwing is fighting the players and aspects of the massive hole in his chest, while the armor that kept him alive is shattered and his thoughts are completely out the window, he's barely able to keep himself together, as rage envelops him and he literally falls apart piece by piece. Players push him back during the Madness of Deathwing encounter, and this is when Thrall powers with the Dragon Soul a 3rd time to strike him down and slay him for good. Before Deathwing, there was now Tirion, but the entire existence of Deathwing was nothing but pain. His death is surely one of the most graphic in WoW and takes place over the course of 2 raid fights, which has never happened again or since. You almost feel bad for him as he loses himself to the Whispers and is completely lost as you watch his body do literally anything it possibly can to kill you, so it earns a #1 spot on this list. And this concludes our list. Many characters have come and gone, and some in more brutal fashions than others.